Now it is my pleasure to introduce Eyita Gaga. Eyita has been working as a registered nurse since 2007. She received her bachelor's degree from St. Olaf College in Northfield, Minnesota. After working at Mayo Clinic in Rochester, Minnesota, and Cedars-Sinai Hospital in Los Angeles, California, she decided to focus on international volunteer work. She has worked with Doctors Without Borders since 2011 and being a part of the emergency response teams in Niger, South Sudan, Liberia, and Sierra Leone. Please welcome Eyita Gaga.
Hi. Hello. Mic check, check, check. Can you hear me? Okay. No. Hello. Can you hear me out there? Can you hear me? Okay, perfect. So my name is Eyita. It's actually pronounced Eyita. Since my mother's here, I'll pronounce it correctly. It's Eyita Gaga. I'm originally from Ethiopia. I came to the States when I was 7 years old. I grew up right here in Rochester and started my nursing career at the Mayo Clinic. Thank you for being here. I'm very happy to talk to you about my time in Sierra Leone and Liberia. It was an amazing experience. So thank you for taking the time out your day to be here, to listen to me. So I want to start out by showing you a video. It does a really good job of explaining the work that Doctors Without Borders does. Doctors Without Borders, Médecins Sans Frontières, is the French translation for Doctors Without Borders, so MSF is what you'll hear in the video. Oh, no audio. Whoops.
MSF staff work in nearly 70 countries to provide emergency medical care and relief supplies directly to people who need it most. Teams wearing this t-shirt provide medical assistance to people struggling to survive violence, war, epidemics, hunger, denial of healthcare, population displacements, and natural disasters. Providing the best quality care in any and all circumstances requires a good supply network. That's why, since the 1980s, we've developed specialized logistics able to respond in real time.
En moins de 24 heures, nous pouvons expédier l'équivalent de 2 hôpitaux complets. Je peux vous garantir que cette boîte sera dans 24 heures à Haïti. Ici, à l'hôpital des Tabards, nous prenons en charge 1500 patients par mois.
Wearing this t-shirt means that we all engage to follow certain principles laid out in MSF's charter.
The principles of independence and impartiality are actually our strongest security measures. So when in the field we are wearing this t-shirt, in a way we are protected because people know that we are outside of the conflict.
Médecins Sans Frontières provides impartial help without discrimination and independently of any political powers. We are neutral and we do not take sides in conflicts. We treat our patients with dignity and respect for their cultural and religious beliefs. Impartiality is essential. We treat each patient on the basis of medical need, not on any other criteria. 90% of our budget comes from private donors all over the world. This generous funding gives us freedom to independently choose our actions without interference from political and economic powers. Our work in emergencies often leads us to speak out publicly to highlight forgotten crises, to mobilize other aid organizations, to draw attention to weaknesses in the aid system, to demand access to people trapped in conflict zones, or to campaign for fair access to essential medicines for all. Wearing an MSF t-shirt means being part of a worldwide medical humanitarian organization that speaks out freely and acts with total independence.
Thank you. So like the video said, MSF is in over 70 countries around the world. There's a map there that that shows you where there we go, where those countries are around the world. The vast majority of the work that's being done by MSF is being done by national staff, so people from the countries that we're in. It's only about 8% of MSF staff that's internationally based, like myself. So let's jump into this epidemic. So the Ebola virus was discovered in 1976. Since 1976, there have been 20 outbreaks. They have all occurred in very rural areas of Central and Eastern African countries. So it was very new to this part of Africa. And as you can see the map of Africa right there, these three countries were the most heavily hit throughout this epidemic: Guinea, Sierra Leone, and Liberia. In the first year, the first case was declared in March of 2014. So between March 2014 to 2015, there were a total of about 25,000 cases worldwide, out of which about 10,460 people lost their lives. And to give you an idea, prior to this epidemic, the one epidemic that had affected the most people had killed about 425 people. So as you can see, this was unprecedented. Nobody had imagined how big it ended up being. So in the first year, MSF set up 8,500 clinics, around 8,500 clinics across the three countries. We set up 15 treatment centers and transit centers across the three countries. We admitted about 8,500 people, and out of which about 5,000 cases were confirmed cases. So there's confirmed, suspect, and probable cases. Confirmed is people that had the virus. Suspect and probable cases were people that were admitted, but were waiting for their lab results to see if they had the virus or not. And out of the 5,000, around 2,400 people were discharged, recovered. So factors that led to the epidemic. There are many factors that led to how big this epidemic became. And before I discuss some of those factors, I want to try an experiment. So if everybody in here could close your eyes, and try to imagine a Rochester without the Mayo Clinic first, which is difficult. But try to imagine this Rochester and without the Olmsted Medical Center. And in this world, I tell you that 10 people in this room have the Ebola virus. And imagine you weren't part of the 10. Just imagine and try to connect with the feelings and the thoughts that would bring to mind, right? And then I tell you that you are one of the 10 people that have the virus. And I know different people in here have different level of knowledge about viruses and about the Ebola virus, but keeping in mind what you know, how would you feel hearing just this news that you have this virus? And suddenly I tell you that, think about all of the interactions that you've had throughout your day with your loved ones, your neighbors, your friends, and all of that would have to come to an end. And you have to go to this treatment facility that people are dressed in these suits. You can't see their faces. You can't really interact with them. Half of them don't even speak your language. Think about all the emotions that would bring about. And you can open your eyes now. Thankfully, that remains in the imaginary world, but that wasn't an imaginary world for a lot of people. And so try to keep that in mind throughout this presentation and when we discuss the factors that led to the epidemic. First is fear and suspicion of the unknown virus. A lot of you probably felt scared, right? And that's how many people felt. This virus had not existed in this region of the world. So especially at the beginning and throughout this epidemic, there has been a lot of fear and suspicion that has led to continued transmission of the virus. hiding cases because that's a natural reaction, right? Because of all the fear and suspicion. When people started falling sick, they would hide their symptoms. And that doesn't mean that they stopped interacting with people, they just didn't come out. And so that's how the transmission kept happening. Unsafe burial practices, there are traditional burial practices that have existed for hundreds and thousands of years that involve interacting with the dead body, cleaning and clothing the dead body. That really was a major factor in how big this epidemic became. A weak public health system. Both Liberia and Sierra Leone had recently come out of civil wars that had left the public health system pretty weak. And then on top of that, at the beginning of the epidemic, when the hospitals were still running, people that were sick would go to hospitals. And so that led to a lot of healthcare workers falling ill and people losing their lives that way. So that further weakened the public health system. So let's talk about the virus. Since its discovery, there has been some research about this virus, but there really wasn't that much known about it. So what we do know, though, is that the virus is hosted by the fruit bat. It lives in the fluids of the body, so in the blood, in the urine, sweat. And then the fruit bat interacts with other animals, specifically chimpanzees, gorillas. These are animals that are hunted. And so when a hunter hunts these animals, brings it back to his community, that's how it's transmitted to a human being. And once it's transmitted to a human being, it's easily transmitted to other human beings. The targets in the body, mostly cells that are responsible for the immune response, so it really renders the body really weak. Cells that are in the lining of the blood vessels that causes a lot of internal and external bleeding. And then cells in the liver, and a lot of cases end up losing their lives by multiple organ failure. So symptoms: fever, sore throat, headache, muscle pain, intense weakness, vomiting, diarrhea. As you can see, these are symptoms that are shared by many illnesses. So it's very hard to distinguish between different illnesses. It's only through a blood test that you can know. Activities in managing an epidemic. The first one is isolation and care for the patient. This is what we do when we set up a treatment facility. That's the main objective, is to isolate and care for the patient. Safe burials. We always have a team that goes out to communities if there's any deaths in the communities to do safe burials. But in order for community members to feel safe enough and to call us if there's a community death, we have teams going out to do awareness raising. This is what I was doing mostly in Liberia. Health promoters that go out and make those connections with community members to build that trust. Disease surveillance. This is whenever there's a call for that somebody in the community is ill, we have a team that goes out and does an assessment to see if the person needs to be transferred to a treatment facility. Contact tracing. This is really important but also very hard to do, because for every case that arrives, we have to get a list of everybody that this person has come in contact with since they developed symptoms. And this is hard to do a lot of times. And what we do is we monitor the health of these people for 21 days and to see if they themselves start to develop any symptoms, and if they do, to bring them to a treatment facility. And then we support non-Ebola healthcare because a lot of times the hospitals shut down when there's an epidemic that's announced because healthcare workers are not prepared, and so they don't want to risk their lives. So a lot of hospitals shut down, and in order to get them up and running again, we need to train healthcare workers. So this is a major part of what we do during an epidemic. So at the beginning of the epidemic, March of 2014, I was here in Rochester. I was working full-time at the Community Behavioral Health Hospital. I don't know if anybody knows that. It's a mental health facility. And then I was working part-time at Recover Health. I was a case manager. It's a home health agency, Recover Health. And I was a part-time student at RCTC. And I was planning to take a year off starting July 2014. I was well on my way with this plan. In July 2014, I went to Thailand, and I got this email from MSF saying that they needed a health promoter to manage the health promotion activities in a place called Foya in Liberia. And to make that decision, laid out my pros and cons. These are my pros and cons. I love traveling. This is part of why I do the work. It was going to be a short-term assignment. The proposal was for 6 weeks, so it's not that long. Valuable work. I was hearing the news and reading the news that was coming out of West Africa, and it was devastating and horrifying. So it was, to be able to do something about that, I knew I would find that valuable. And it was challenging work. This is how I grow, this is how I become better, is by doing challenging work, so it was going to be that. That would be nice. Cons, leaving personal life, so abandoning the year-off program. Getting the virus, transmitting it, possibly dying from the virus. That was a concern. Yeah. And then unknown physical and mental health effects. Reading about something is one thing, but being in the middle of it and, in that environment, I didn't know how I would come out at the other end. So that was also a concern. But I decided to go, obviously, why I'm here. So Foya is, right here. It's a place that is obviously very close to the border with Guinea and Sierra Leone, and MSF was running a treatment facility there, an EMC, Ebola Management Center. It was actually the place where the first American doctor got infected. He was working for an organization called Samaritan's Purse. They were running a treatment facility in Foya. It was also the place where the first case of Ebola existed in Liberia. So it's kind of a hub. So once the American doctor got infected, Samaritan's Purse shut down their activities, and so MSF took up their activities and increased the capacity, increased it to 100 beds instead of the 40. At the time that I was going, so this was at the end of September of 2014, there were 18 confirmed cases being treated in the facility, 25 patients in general. So my journey began because at this time, at the end of September, beginning of October, Liberia had decided to officially shut down their borders. So we couldn't just fly into Liberia. So I flew in through Conakry, which is the capital of Guinea, and MSF was running a treatment facility there too. So I got to stay there for a couple of days. I shadowed the health promoter that was working at the treatment facility there, so that was a nice little orientation to the work I would be doing. And then, or I thought I was going to be doing, I'll get to that. And then I flew from Conakry to Kisudugu, took a small airplane, and then drove to Gekadu, which is right there. And then in Gekadu, I took a couple of pictures. This is right at the border. Across the river there is Liberia. So we were waiting for the officials to get there. These are a couple of my colleagues. So I took the time to take some pictures. This is another picture. This is once the officials arrived. We got on the boat, crossed the river. So got to Foya. Foya is right around here. When we got to Foya, there's a couple of things that happened. The health promoter that was already working at the treatment facility decided to extend her stay there. And then there was a small exploratory team that was sent over to a place called Bwenjama, because we were seeing, and Bwenjama is this one right here. We were seeing that a lot of the cases that were coming to our facility in Foya were coming from this area called Bwenjama. So we sent a small team to see what was going on there, and this small team decided that would be beneficial to have a small team based in Bwenjama. So I was asked to be part of that team working in health promotion, and I agreed. So it was going to be me, the project manager, we had an admin, finance person, and then we had a logistician responsible for all the logistics of everything. So the objectives of the health promotion activities in Bwenjama, the first one was going to be to improve the capacity of the county health teams. Bwenjama is actually the capital of the county. So the county is called Lofa County, and Foya also belongs in Lofa County. And Bwenjama, because it was the capital, there was quite a bit of activities going on, a lot of health promotion that was already taking place, not just by the county, but other organizations that were present and doing a lot of health promotion. So one of the main objectives was to just empower the work that was already being done by providing training or anything that the health promoters needed to do their job more effectively. And then increase quality and coverage of health promotion activities, especially in rural and border areas. These were especially where the cases were coming from, so it was important to get there. Reduce stigma by raising awareness of services available in Lofa County. So stigmatization was a huge factor that was there when I got there. So a lot of people already had heard about the virus at this point in September, October of 2014. So there was a lot of posters around, a lot of word getting out about how real Ebola was and how deadly it was. So people had heard about it, so it was just producing a lot of fear, though. So, and out of that fear came a lot of stigmatization. So the word Ebola, if anybody had recovered from it, if anybody was working as a, at a treatment facility, if anybody was a contact, so family members of patients with Ebola, they were all stigmatized. So this was a really big objective of ours, was to try to reduce that fear and stigmatization. Facilitate and empower communities to protect their health through behavior changes, because ultimately that's what it would take to end the epidemic. This is my team. These five, I can't say enough about them. The one on the rock, his name is Francis. To my right there, standing, is Jacob. Muhammad is kneeling, and Serena is to my left, and Joanna is kneeling. So they were already working for the Liberian Red Cross when we got there. They were already doing health promotion, and the purpose in hiring them was to fulfill that objective of empowering the activities that were already going on. So there were a couple of things that we were looking for. One is to have a fair ratio of male to female. We were also looking for languages that they spoke. There are 16 indigenous languages in Liberia. And even though, the official language is English, so a lot of people speak English, the communities that we would be visiting some members would not speak English. So it was important to have a fair representation of the communities that we'd be visiting. So one of the activities we engaged in to fulfill our objectives was to give training of trainers. So we would invite supervisors of health promotion activities from different organizations and train them, empower them through answering any of the questions that they had, and also, one of the main things out of the training of trainers was to just unify the messages that were going out to the communities. Because there were so many actors, there were a lot of messages that communities were getting, and not always the same. A lot of them were contradictory a lot of times. So we needed to make sure that the messages that were going out were unified. So that was a main reason why we did the training of trainers. And then we did community visits. The target populations, the number one was communities producing cases and community deaths. We looked at the data coming out of the FOIA treatment facility. We saw where people were coming from, and we went. Traditional healers, traditional birth attendants, community health workers, hospitals were shut down at this time. So a lot of sick people were going to these people. So we needed to get the information to them so they could protect themselves and do their jobs as safely as they could. Communities sharing a border with high-risk areas. These are towns or communities in the border. And communities with reportedly high accounts of stigmatization. These are our messages. These are our 6 key messages. We definitely focused on talking about the treatment facility, or the EMC in FOIA. There were a lot of rumors that were circulating about what we were doing in the EMC. So we tried to address those concerns. And stigmatization was a big one that we looked at. So these were, in the time that I was there, we visited 14 communities, and in yellow you'll see where all those communities are. In green were the communities that we identified for future visits, so the person that was going to be replacing me, that was her task. And then in pink, those are the communities that we tried to access, we tried to get to, because the need was there, but there were no roads, or not good enough to use, anyways. So we couldn't get to them, unfortunately. This was one of our visits. This is a video, actually, so I'll play it. This is a community called Betbedu. It's a small village that borders Guinea, and even though it's a small village, it was heavily impacted by this epidemic. Over 100 people lost their lives from this community. So the audience that we were in front of were definitely sitting with a lot of grief and a lot of questions. We ended up visiting Betbedu a total of 3 times in the time that I was there because there were just so much to cover. So you can play.
And possible that you may survive the good. Thank you. If there any question, you just wait a minute. As soon as my friend and family will deal with everything, all of your questions, I will continue to answer it. Now, somebody coming in to talk. What are some of the things that you can show on you that you will know yet to see something is happening to you and I'm satisfied with it? Somebody will come and explain it to you. Thank you.
And then after an hour, good morning. As you are getting the definition of Ebola.
So I was surprised. That's me by that ringing, because it was actually the project manager that was doing the filming. She came out to Betbedu with us, and one of the things that I had emphasized during the training was to turn off the cell phones when we went to the community. So she had left hers on because she wasn't in the training. I was kidding. Just a few things to point out. Mohammed was doing the translation. So the language of the community, this particular community, was called Mandingo, and it was only him that could speak it. So everybody else spoke in English, and he did the translation because we needed everybody in the community to understand what we were saying. And then that bottle that Jacob was carrying, that Felicia took from him, we always carry 2 bottles with us, and they're both diluted chlorine of different concentration. And we used one for our hands. If ever we touched anything, we always were quick to spray our hands. And then we used the second one that was more concentrated to, at the end of our visits when we were leaving, to spray our feet before we got into the car. So that's just for safety. And we would explain to the community everything that we were doing. We were as transparent as we possibly could be because there were so many rumors that were circulating about these bottles, about foreigners coming in and potentially, bringing in the virus. So we were adamant about explaining everything that we were doing and answering every question that communities had. Boom. Challenges. The biggest challenge was timing, because this was around the time that people needed to get out into their farms to do harvesting in the mornings. And to be able to get there, give the information, have enough time to answer everybody's question, that was a challenge, because but we would see a lot of times at the beginning there would be a lot of people there, and then by the end of our presentation there wouldn't be so many people there because they needed to get out into their farm. So that was a challenge. Disorganization of other actors' health promotion activities. It seemed like there was a new organization coming up every other day when I was there. So organizing all of that, coordinating all of that to make sure that the communities we were visiting really needed it and hadn't been visited by other organizations, that was a challenge. Poor road conditions, limiting access to some areas and distances to locations. Those were definitely challenges. And then so far minimal communication support to provide helpful material, because getting out to the communities is one way to get the message out, but there was also radios, we get on the TV. So I was working on that towards the end. I had met with several radio people to try to get our messages out there. So that was one thing that my replacement had to follow up on. But then the rewards are endless. A lot of times it would take an hour and a half, 2 hours to get to some of the communities we visited. So I got to see the countryside, and it was beautiful. You know, in that time, I also got to know my colleagues, and having those conversations with them were also great. And then I got to meet Mama D. So I don't know if anybody has seen this video, but this kid, Mama D, there's a YouTube video. No, I don't have it. But thanks for being on top of it. I could have, but I didn't. So there's a YouTube video of him. He survived. He was treated at our facility in Foya, and he survived. And he, you know, he had that childish energy, and he was dancing one time, and somebody recorded it, and with his permission we put it on YouTube, but he had no idea. He became kind of a YouTube star, like mini YouTube star, but he had no idea. So when we went to his community, I got to show him the video, and I got to explain to his family, that's his mother and father. I tried to convey how big of a deal it is. They didn't really buy it, but yeah, his showing him the video was amazing to see their reaction. And then at the end of my 6 weeks, it ended up being about 6.5 weeks. Flew to Monrovia, which is the capital of Liberia, in that helicopter, and then flew out of Monrovia. As you can see, people were taking measures to protect themselves. Everybody was suited up in the airport, which was interesting. So, my 21 days, this 21-day period, that was kind of a big deal here, I guess. A lot of people were being quarantined and such. This is the incubation period for the virus, so 2 to 21 days. Incubation period means the time in which the virus is inside the body, but you're asymptomatic, so you're not showing any symptoms and you're not contagious in this period. So, because in this time, good question. In this time, this was at the beginning of, or at the end of October, beginning of November. Actually, it was like mid-November at this time. There was a lot of news coming out of this country saying that people were scared and that coming back here would necessitate being quarantined and all of that. There was a nurse in New Jersey that was quarantined, one of our nurses for MSF. So I decided, no, thank you, America. So I went to Paris, France, which is where my boyfriend was too, so that just worked out. And nobody said anything, really. In France. Like, they saw my passport, they saw where I had gone, but they were like, yep, okay, next. So that was nice to have that peace of mind, but also, you know, MSF had requirements. During this 21-day, you have to check your temperature twice, and you want to check your temperature. You want to know if you have this virus. So you kind of enter a paranoid state of mind, checking in with yourself about how you're feeling consistently. So, and you notify MSF if any symptoms develop. You always stay near a hospital that you can go to. No traveling, no working, and you find hobbies in this time. And so at the end of November, this is the time that I got another email from MSF saying, hey, I know you just got back from Liberia, but what do you think about going to Freetown, which is the capital of Sierra Leone, where MSF was planning on building an EMC, an Ebola Management Center, a temporary EMC, to be a nurse, to be one of 3 expatriate nurses supervising the nursing activities in this center. Again, pros and cons. Pretty much the same. The only difference, new experience or type of nursing. What I was doing in Liberia was not really nursing, it was health promotion, which was great, but this would be using those nursing skills. And then cons, would put me at a higher risk, because I would have that direct contact with people who were confirmed for having the virus. So again, I said yes. And And this was at the time, so at the end of November, these were where the cases were coming out of, and how many people were being diagnosed. As you can see, Freetown is right here. There were a lot of cases coming out of Freetown. And even though there were several organizations, even the United States government was sending money and support and resources to this area to build a treatment facility or several treatment facilities for this area. But they were taking quite a bit of time to do so. So because MSF had the capacity to do it quicker, we decided to build a temporary one. So 100 beds. It would be in this open space that was available because all the schools were shut down at this time. There was this school called Prince of Wales in Kingdom. It was an all-boys private school, but was not running and had this massive space available, and they allowed us to build on that space. Engage with motivated community of Kingdom that's around Freetown. In promoting Ebola control activities and explore high transmission areas in Freetown. And we worked very closely with the Ministry of Health in Freetown to provide the care. And we had the epidemiologist who was working very closely with them. So this was the team. I don't know if you guys can see this. It's very small, eh? So we had, this was the organogram for the team that would be going. We had 25 expatriates going. So we had the emergency coordinator at the top. We had the office people, so the field coordinator, the admin, finance people. The health promoter also fell under this little bracket there. We had the logistics team and the water and sanitation team that was going to be going. And then we had the medical team, and right there, number 2. I'm nurse number 2. That was my role, nurse number 2. And we had 3 doctors that were, there were 4 initially, doctors that would be going, and then we had the epidemiologist, we had the psychosocial team, or the mental health team that was going to be going too, which was nice, and the pharmacy and all that. And the comms director was also, we had a communications director that was there with us too. So this is what an Ebola Management Center typically looks like. This isn't how ours was laid out, but just to give you an idea of what is in a treatment facility, there's always a fence that designates the high-risk area. This is the area, unless you're a patient, you don't go in unless you're fully suited. And then there's that double fence, and that's to distinguish the distance for visitors when they came to visit their family members, friends, is to maintain their safety. We had that second fence around. We always have a triage area. That's where the majority of the patients would come in through. And then we had the low probable, high probable area. This is also suspect probable. This is depending on how the clinical presentation of the patient. We would designate between suspect or probable, or low probable, high probable. And then the Ebola ward, that's for once we get the results, and if a patient has the virus, we move them over to the confirmed part. And then we always have a morgue in the high-risk area. And then in the low-risk area outside of the fence, we have the dressing undressing zone, so that's where we suit up. This is our facility. This is where I worked. I didn't take many pictures because I didn't realize I was going to give this presentation. It's hard to see, but the 3 tents there, 1, 2, 3. How we laid our treatment facility, or EMC, out is all 3 tents were designated for confirmed cases. The first tent to the right there was for the most intense cases. We labeled the ICU. So that's if a patient comes in and cannot tolerate oral foods or fluids and needed an IV line for hydration. That's where they would go. And then the second tent, we designated that the oral tent, so if a patient can eat, they would go there. And then the third one, the convalescent tent, that's for the patients that are doing really well and are awaiting their lab results or the doctor's assessment to get them discharged. So it was a great place to work. And then this was our suspect probable zone, or the low probable, high probable. I got this picture before we opened, when it was still being built, because what we realized is that we can't have a tent for low probability, because this is the area where you don't know who has the virus and who doesn't. So we don't want there to be so much contact between people that they could potentially give the virus to somebody else. So what we did was, and the logistics team did a great job of building these individual rooms. So each patient had their own room and they had their own material that they needed, and the health promotion team would work closely with patients here to promote minimal contact with other patients and the importance of that. So we were, once we did open, we were open 24 hours a day. We offered supportive treatment. There's no treatment for Ebola. So what we offer is treatment, supportive treatment. So any symptoms we treat, try to make it as comfortable for the patients as we can. Systematic prescription for broad-range antibiotics, anti-malarials, and multivitamins at admission. Each person who's admitted gets put on these systematic treatments. Offer psychological support. We had an amazing mental health team that was working closely with the patients, and also in times of, if a patient dies, they would work in counseling the family members. We provided meals at least 3 times a day, hydration around the clock. This was any time anybody wanted to eat. We tried to just give them as much food as possible to make their bodies as strong as possible to fight the virus. Health promotion services that promoted visitation with families. That was one of the roles of the health promoters. Water and sanitation team in charge of cleanliness, handling of dead bodies. We had a fully equipped lab and staff that was near our facility, which made it easy because we could get the lab results within 3 to 4 hours. So that was great. And then we used facility to train staff from other organizations. Like I said, there were a lot of organizations that were working on opening up their own treatment facility. And so we used our facility to train. When I first got there, the treatment facility was not open yet. It was still being built. So because I had had experience in Liberia working with health promotion, I worked with hiring and training. My first 3 days was just hiring, training health promoters to work in the treatment facility. Then once we did open, I became responsible for the pharmacy, triage, and kitchen activities. This didn't really work out very well, because what we noticed was that amongst the 3 of us, the 3 expatriate nurses, we realized that the focus needed to be on the training of the nurses. So we couldn't focus on other parts of the treatment facility like the pharmacy and the kitchen. So we ended up distributing roles based on the different tents and the different areas that the patients were in and the nursing activities were happening. So I became responsible for the ICU. That's the intensive care unit. And there were 16 nurses, 16 nurse aides that I was responsible for training and making sure that they were providing care safely. The main activity in the ICU is IV management. So this is a risky procedure to do in this context, because you're dealing with blood, and when you're dealing with blood and Ebola, it's risky. So I need to make sure that everybody was doing their jobs safely. So that took quite a bit of time. This is the ICU. So this corridor, this is the only facility that I know of that had this plexiglass corridor that went through the tent, and it was really helpful. And the logistics team did a great job of building this, because what it allowed us to do was to observe our patients without having to be fully gowned. So this, like I said, is the most intense patient, so we needed to keep a close eye on them. We had a lot of kids that were being treated, so we definitely need to keep an eye on them. So we could do rounds and see what the needs were before we suited up. And that was great to have that tool. So daily schedule, this is just to give you an idea. This was the hope. This was the dream to follow the schedule. But especially at the beginning, it's just impossible to keep it this organized. It was pretty chaotic. But in red is to highlight when a team was going into the high-risk zone. So at the beginning especially, I was rounding with everybody that was going in because the training needed to be given, and we need to make sure that everybody was doing everything safely. So me personally, I was going in about 4 or 5 times a day, which was a bit tough at the beginning there. But you know, like I said, like 10, 20 things would happen, if not more, on a daily basis that would just throw this into the air. But we tried to get all of this done in a day. That's the suit. This is before going in. So our comms director one day was taking pictures of the activities. So she took these pictures and sent them to me, thankfully. So this is before going in, right before going in, and coming out. Yeah, we got those, that water was very helpful afterwards because you just sweat in those suits. It's incredible. Shower and dressing zone. This is a kid who was being discharged from the suspect probable area. So a lot of kids under 5, or all the kids under 5 really didn't survive if they were diagnosed. So thankfully he was not diagnosed. He was just, but both his parents had gotten the virus, and his mom passed away, but his father survived. So he was being discharged, which was great. And when you're discharged, you have to go through this decontamination. So I had to wash him. That's me. I had never washed a baby before. All the parents out there. Props. Huh? Oh yeah, you have to have a lot of water for an Ebola management center. A lot of chlorine, a lot of water to do the work for an EMC. So so that's what our water and sanitation team was responsible for. And this decontamination process is actually, we had to wash with chlorine, diluted chlorine water, and then regular water to decontaminate it. And everything that goes into the high-risk area has to be thrown out. And we give them new clothes and everything. So it's our doctors, a couple of our doctors doing their job. Yeah, it's doctor's lounge. So we had a tent in the lower risk zone, the medical tent for the nurses and doctors, and also this is the MD this is how the doctors did their assessments, right? So they would do rounds, but all the information that they would take from the high risk area can't come out. So that's one of the benefits of having that plexiglass too, is because we could take pictures of what they recorded, and then they could take that picture and do their assessment in the lounge, so, or do their charting and orders and all that. This is our pharmacy. These guys were distributing the meds, so we would put each medication or each patient's medications in a Ziploc bag. That's what they were responsible for, and then they would distribute based on which tent the patients were in and which shift, so day shift, PM shift, night shift medication. So that's our pharmacy. That's another tent that was also on the low risk zone designated for that. So leaving Freetown, this was at the end of January at this time. So I started at December 1st was my first day in Freetown, and then I left, it was mid-January. And the ICU beds were all occupied. We had 30 beds in the ICU. It was all taken by the time I left. Peak EMC population was 60 patients the time that I was there. Case fatality rate, we saw 50% of the cases, so it followed the general trend with this virus this time around. So 50% of the cases that we saw survived and 50% lost their lives. Early and intense hydration increased survival. This is what we were saying. That's why the ICU was all full, was because we were trying to hydrate as much as we could because we were seeing that that was helping a little bit at least. So starting electrolyte replacement, magnesium, calcium, but this needed a lot of training of the nurses. So we were starting the training of the nurses. And then we were starting rotation of ICU nurses to other parts of the EMC. It was hard to work in the ICU mentally. That's where the most intense cases were. That's where most of the deaths were. So working there was difficult for the nurses, understandably. So we were starting to rotate them out for them to be able to have that time in other parts of the treatment facility that gives you a little bit more hope, like where patients were discharging from. Challenges, limited time in the high-risk zone. Because of that suit and how hard it is to work in the suit, we had this time designated 45 minutes that we could be in the high-risk zone. But to get anything done in the ICU in 45 minutes was not happening, really. Because, every time you would go in, you would find at least 2-3 patients who had taken out their, I mean, one of the later signs of this virus is people start getting confused. So, they were taking out IV lines and, bleeding everywhere. So we would have to try to explain to the patients again the importance of it all, and then to try to establish a new line. All of that took quite a bit of time. So 45 minutes and with 30 patients and 5 nurses in each shift was not, or 4 nurses and 4 nurse aides in each shift was difficult. So stress, frustration management was a big one. Remaining sane in an insane environment. So a lot of chaos, a lot of activities happening, and so trying to remain calm and collected in this environment was difficult. The children's deaths were especially hard. Like I said, all the patients, all the kids who were under 5 didn't survive. So that was a difficult thing to go through. No contact with patients. As any nurse knows, this is how you establish, that this is such a big part of how you communicate that care and compassion to your patients. And especially in this environment, it was much needed. And to not have that was a big challenge. And then no human contact overall. There was this one day that I remember specifically that one of the nurses I was working with, it was a particularly hard day, and she and I had a moment of where we could sit down and talk a little bit, and she broke down and cried about how difficult all of this was, especially the kids. They would arrive with so much energy, and then at the end you just see one after the other just going down. So to not have that touch or hug her was, sorry, that was a bit difficult. Focusing on training of staff when there's so much patient care to be given. As a nurse, each time I would go in to the high-risk zone, it was my instinct was to be a nurse, but to not have, or to focus on the training instead of that was a bit difficult for me. But the teamwork, right? We got this treatment center up and running in a week, and that takes a lot of teamwork. And so that was amazing to be part of. And I was working with a team that was really, it was them that was losing their families and their community. Gosh, it's tough. So for them to show up every day and to put in the work was great to see, inspiring. So Aminata is the woman, well actually they're both named Aminata, which is crazy. But Aminata, the woman in orange, she, MSF actually did a big profile on her. She was admitted with 3 of her kids. 2 of them were discharged without being diagnosed, so they were in the suspect probable, and they didn't have the virus, so they were discharged. And then her and her son, unfortunately, had the virus. So they were treated in the facility, and what ended up happening was that she became kind of the mom in the tent. So there were quite a few kids, and as you can imagine, being in those suits, it's scary for kids. So so to have her on the inside, and she herself was fighting the virus, but she was just a mom to everybody, not just her son, and she was looking out for all the kids. So that was great. And then she recovered, which was awesome. And then actually the other Aminata, we ended up hiring. So once you recover from the virus, you develop an immunity for a certain amount of time. We're still trying to figure out what that time is, but at least 10 years. That's the word out now. Towards the virus, but that's changing as the time progresses. But Aminata, we hired as a caretaker. So because we were admitting a lot of kids, what ended up happening is that people that were recovered, we asked them if they were willing to come back as caretakers, and Aminata was willing to. She came back and worked with us, so that was nice. Update. Liberia and Sierra Leone are free of the virus, which is, yay. Oh. Yay, yeah! Let's clap. Yes. I don't mean to go back. Okay, there. But Guinea, unfortunately, in the week ending, October 25th here, has admitted 3 new cases. So the epidemic is still around. So there's quite a bit of contacts that are being monitored. This is all the numbers from the beginning to the end that we have. Guinea, Liberia, and Sierra Leone were the 3 countries most heavily hit, but there were other places that produced cases. The U.S. made the list. There were 4 cases in the U.S. So a total of 28,500 around, and 11,313 deaths. So currently, MSF still has teams in place in all 3 countries. As of November 1st, 2015, a total of 75 international and about 1,024 national staff on the ground. So that's it.